What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about the Fosi Audio DA2120C integrated amplifier. Now, this company reached out to me through email and was like, hey, we sell a lot of amps on Amazon. Do you want to check one out for a review? And I wasn't really too familiar with them, and I could tell they were just another, company that makes inexpensive Class D amps coming out of Asia. A lot of these companies use the same casework. A lot of these companies overstate their wattage and stuff like that. I usually stay away from them, but I had really good experience with one company, Auric. I love their stuff. And so I was like, let's give this other company a shot. So what I told myself was this: I'm going to go to their website, and if I can find an integrated amp that looks good, has a subwoofer output, and is reasonably priced, then I'll review it. And that's exactly what I found in the DA2120C. The reason I chose it is it looked like it had nice binding posts on it. It had three digital inputs, USB, coax, and optical. So it has an internal DAC, as well as a subwoofer output. And you guys know me, Nemo Propaganda loves bass. I will not review an amplifier that does not have a subwoofer output. So love to see that. It also does have a remote control. Most of these inexpensive Class D amplifiers coming out of Asia do use fairly large power bricks, and that is something to keep in mind. Because I think a lot of you guys, you see these little amps and you're like, oh man, I could totally accommodate this on my desktop. You know what I mean? It's so small, it's so cute, but you want to make sure you have a spot to put the power brick. So interesting thing is the antenna is quite large for how small the amp is. I'm sure they could have put a smaller one on there. And I'm sorry if you can't see this amp too well here. It's small. You're going to have to just rely on the graphic on screen to really see the unit. So we'll do this review the same way we generally do. I'll throw the main specs on screen so you guys can check that out. I'll tell you what the amp sounds like. I'll tell you about some standout features. We'll do some comparisons to other inexpensive amps, and then we'll wrap up the video. So this is primarily going to be used as a desktop amplifier, in my opinion, by most people. I did some Google searches and I found some users that own this, and almost all of them are using them in a desktop rig. And that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that. I would say you could use it in like a small room also. That's where I used it here. I also used it upstairs in a TV rig, and it was fine. But let's start with the sound signal. Oh, standout features real quick. For me, the standout feature is really going to be that subwoofer output, that built-in DAC, and those three digital inputs. Essentially, the connectivity, the ins and outs are the standout feature for $179. One thing I do want to mention about specs is most of these companies that make these affordable or inexpensive Class D Chinese amps, they all overstate their wattage. I believe they measure their wattage at 10% THD. I don't know for sure if Fosi does that, but I've talked to a lot of these companies, and I've asked them, and they all have said like, yes, they rate it at 10%, which is, it's kind of bullshit. They shouldn't do it, but I kind of understand if one of them does it, they all have to do it, or it's going to just seem like their amp is really weak. Fosi says this is a 240 watt amp that puts out 120 watts a channel. I don't believe that. I'm going to say it's probably only anywhere from half to 2/3 that in real life. That's just me guessing. I haven't measured it, but I'm going to say anywhere from half to 2/3. That's generally what I've found. Like if they say it's a 50 watt amp, it's usually anywhere from like 25 watts to 35 watts in reality. They're claiming 120 a channel. I'm gonna say it's anywhere from 60 to 90 realistically. 90s, I'm being real generous, but you never know. Some of these little amps can crank out some power. But I will also say the power you get from Class D, to me, it doesn't seem to be the same as the power you get from Class A, B, right? Like I have a 50 watt RMS, little old Emotiva Mini X that can crank way harder than any of these 100 and 200 watt little Class D amps can. I digress. So what does it sound like? We got a top end that's going to be a little bit on the forward side of neutral. You get a slew of EQ options. I didn't use any of them. I did my best to ensure all of that shit was turned off. It does have tone controls. Again, I tried to turn it all off and then just run in a pure direct mode, if you will. The treble quality is kind of what I've come to expect from most inexpensive amps. It's a little bit on the forward side. It's open, it's airy, it's sparkly, but it is somewhat unrefined and could be considered grainy by some, especially if you're used to listening to more expensive equipment. This is no surprise. It is just $179 after all, and gives quite a bit of connectivity, so we do have to manage our expectations. Moving down to the mid-range was just a little bit recessed. It wasn't necessarily the most open or expansive mid-range, but for $179, I did feel like it was perfectly serviceable. Moving down to bass, it didn't seem to have too much of a bass hump like in the mid-bass region per se, but it did seem to have boosted bass overall, even when I was listening to it in like a flat mode. I did use the subwoofer output and that seemed to run a little bit hot. I had to turn down my subwoofer about 4 clicks, which is quite a bit. That's not necessarily a bad thing in any way. It just means it has a strong output on the subwoofer out, the RCA. Maybe it's running a little bit hot on the voltage, for example. The included remote control did work just fine. It does have a very small screen in the middle of the unit that I was actually able to see from across the room. It is very bright. The menu functions aren't the most intuitive, but I was able to figure them out. And I will say the unit does appear to be built fairly well with a somewhat thick, what looks like aluminum front plate. So that's what it sounds like, right? It's your typical Class D sound signature that you get in these inexpensive amps. And I hate to make it sound like it's generic, but it's just the truth. I wouldn't be surprised if you could find this exact case, this exact amp with all the same specs with just a different company's name on it. I wouldn't be surprised. I've seen it a ton of times. How does it compare to some other stuff? So there's some affordable amps in this price range I've reviewed. Let's start with the Rythmik A50. That's my go-to recommendation for anyone that's looking for an inexpensive, small form factor Class D amp that's made in Asia. The Rythmik A50 has quite a bit less power. This is rated at 120 times 2. The Rythmik is rated at 50 times 2. So even if they're both rated, overstating their power, the Rythmik does have less power. The Rythmik has some features this unit doesn't have. The Rythmik does have a built-in streamer, but it doesn't have 5-way binding posts. It instead uses a Euroblock or Phoenix style connector. Some people don't like that. The Rythmik does have the cleaner overall sound. Its treble is a little bit more refined. Its mid-range is also a little bit cool and dry, and its bass is actually more neutral than the Fosi. So overall, I would say at $200, the Rythmik A50, while it can't play as loud because it doesn't have as much power, it does have a slightly cleaner, slightly more refined sound. Moving over to something quite a bit larger and very different, the Yamaha RS202. This is $179. I believe the Yamaha RS202 is also about $170 these days. That amplifier does not have anywhere near the same amount of features the Fosi DA2120C has. The Yamaha has spring clip terminals. It does not have a DAC. It does not have subwoofer outputs. So it's really just a bare bones stereo amplifier. The sound is, however, very different, where the Yamaha RS202 is going to be mostly warm from top to bottom with a treble region that is slightly on the darker side of neutral, mid-range that is warm, and bass that is warm and fairly well controlled. The Fosi is going to be more on that cool analytical side with that little bit of dryness, a little bit of coolness in the mid-range, a little bit boosted bass in the bass region. So the sound signatures are very different. If you could have the larger size, if you can accommodate the larger size of the Yamaha and you don't need any of the features the Fosi has, I'd probably say the Yamaha sounds a little bit better, but the Fosi amp has the Yamaha just beat in terms of features, absolutely. Let's compare it to one more amp and then we'll wrap this up. Emotiva makes a mini amp. I don't know what they call it these days. I've had a couple of them over the years. Originally, I think it was launched as the Mini X. And I think later it was renamed to the A2 Flex, but it's about $270 or so on their website. So it is about $100 more expensive. Now, it's not going to have the features that this has. This Fosi audio amp absolutely wins in terms of its feature set, its built-in DAC, its subwoofer outputs, its 3 digital inputs, and so on. It's winning there. But as far as sound quality goes, the Emotiva, I think, God, I should have looked it up. I think it's the A2 Flex, is going to sound better. Their sound signatures are somewhat similar. Both are a little bit brighter in the top end, but where the Fosi can be a little bit grainy with its treble, the Emotiva is a little bit more refined. Where the Fosi's mid-range is a little bit cool and analytical, so is the Emotiva's. The Fosi's bass is a little bit boosted, the Emotiva's isn't, and the Emotiva is Class A B powered. So, the Emotiva doesn't have a remote either. not that $270 one at least. So that's the comparisons. That's the review. The takeaway is essentially this. For under $200, you're getting an amp that I would describe as sounds good enough for the money. You can get slightly better sound out of something like the Rythmik A50 Plus. You're not going to get the exact same feature set, however, nor are you going to get as much power. That's where this thing wins. It's power and feature set. If that's what you need, I'd say it's a good option. If you got any questions, this channel does have a free Discord. Links in the description. Until next time, later.